When you're literally in the business of saving the world, like, you can't even take anything personally. The project itself is too important. There's a certain level of pressure that brings in.
Ari Gesher.
Please welcome Ari Gesher.
He's working on a new deep tech startup called Kairos Aerospace that's fighting greenhouse gas emissions using imaging tech. And in a lot of ways, he was a shaman of sorts, helping to hire some of the world's best software engineers.
These are really smart people, and they're very humble. They're biting off this really big problem, and they don't know how to solve it. And they're not afraid to admit that they don't know how to solve it.
You feel like you sacrificed a lot to get there?
Wow. That's a tough one.
Hello, everyone. You know, over the years, I've had the privilege of being a guest on countless shows. Each conversation, each exchange of ideas has been an opportunity to learn and grow. So today, I come before you, not as a guest, but as the host of a new journey, and I invite you to embark on this journey with me. I've always believed that the power of a story, the experience of another human being, has the capability to bridge the deepest of divides. Our world, with its immense tapestry of cultures, beliefs, and innovations, is a testament to the collective potential we hold when we listen to one another. That is precisely what I wish to do with my new podcast: to listen, to share, and to inspire. Having been in the realm of technology entrepreneurship, I've seen firsthand how a single idea, nurtured with passion and resilience, can transform the world. But more importantly, I've seen the human spirit behind these ideas, the late nights, the challenges overcome, the failures turned into stepping stones. These are the stories that resonate, that inspire, and that forge connections. I want this podcast to be a platform for those stories, but not just stories of success or achievement, but also stories of grit, of passion, and of enduring the human spirit. I promise to bring you intriguing insights into the ever-evolving world of business and technology. For those of you with an entrepreneurial flame, expect candid conversations with some of the brightest minds. But if you're someone who's just looking for a conversation that enriches, that challenges, that inspires you to be better, well, this space is for you too. President Barack Obama once said, "Change is never easy, but always possible." I firmly believe that when we come together, when we engage in genuine dialogue, we not only understand and empathize with each other better, but we also sow the seeds for that very change. So when you're tuning in from your morning commute, during a workout, or as you wind down the day, I invite you to join me in this endeavor. Together, let's journey into a world of ideas, inspiration, and most importantly, hope. Thank you all, and welcome to Vini Vidi Vici. Well, Ari, welcome. It's good to have you on my show.
Thank you. This is exciting.
You're one of the first guests on the Vini Vidi Vici podcast.
It's a neat thing you're putting together here.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you. For those of you listening, Ari is a seasoned tech expert. He's been in the technology industry for, 30 years? 20 years?
20 years.
And change. 20 years and change. Former CTO at Kairos Aerospace, and that's a company dedicated to combating global warming. And, he has also worked at places like Palantir, which is now a publicly listed company and doing really, really well. And a very interesting background, including writing a book on privacy, the architecture of privacy. I'm excited to have you here today. I just like to kick off by asking you to introduce yourself to my audience and, tell them about you and, and start at the very beginning, where kind of where you were born, raised, school, and let's work our way through it and chat about that.
So I was born in 1976 in Chicago. My parents were kind of exiting their hippie phase at that point in time. And early when I was a kid, when I was about 1 year old, they got together with 5 other families and they bought an apartment building, so a 6-flat with 6 different units, and turned it into condominiums. And that, like, for the first 10 years of my life, this was way in the north side of Chicago, Rogers Park, just south of Evanston, and about 2 blocks from Lake Michigan. Really great place to grow up at that time. And it was neat because I sort of grew up inside this community. So, like, I was the oldest kid, but soon after, a lot of the other families had kids. And so we always had this, like, roving band of kids, and we could even like arbitrage between apartments, like, where the cookies are, it's got the good TV with no rules, and so really kind of an idyllic existence, like sort of inside Chicago at that time.
Right.
It's funny, we both now live sort of near the ocean, but like for me, it's always the freshwater lake. Lake Michigan is big enough. That's like my original.
It's like an ocean. I mean, it really is the size.
Yeah.
It's you can barely see across the lake.
That's right. And the water is not, not so salty.
Yeah.
But the waves are not as much fun. So what
No
can you
waves.
do? I lived in Chicago till I was 10. When I started going to school there, it was kind of an interesting situation. So, the Chicago public school district is pretty vast and sprawling, but they have some like talented and gifted schools. So after I did kindergarten at the local school, but then tested into this school called Decatur Classical, which was a bus ride away. It was actually just one neighborhood over. But it was really interesting because it was a really diverse group of kids. Like they were literally bussed in from all over the city, different colors, different backgrounds, like very, very like United Colors of Benetton, but everyone was very, very sharp. And that was a neat environment. We were learning things like Latin and somewhat idyllic. I did have a few years there where I was pretty severely bullied, which was not much fun, but having that home environment, both with my family and then that larger community I was a part of, it didn't break me in the way that I think for some people would take a real big self-esteem hit. And some ways it maybe just turned me into a little bit more of an asshole where I kind of like discount other people's opinions more than I should. It was like, all these people are telling me that I'm bad.
Yeah.
And
what do you think causes that? What do you think causes kids to be bullies?
Well, I mean, in that case,
I had my fair share of bullying when I was a kid as well. So
I mean, I think, I know what the proximate cause was. I don't know what the root cause was. I mean, I think I was just a bit of a weirdo. The proximate cause was just picking my nose. Like, definitely that was like the thing. Or they were like, he's gross. But yeah, it was pretty vicious for like first, second grade. At third grade, it kind of let up. My fourth grade, it was gone, but it definitely stuck with me. It was always interesting because there were always like kids that I was friends with, and there's always that like moment where they decide whether or not they're going to go along with the group or like defend you or whatever.
I often like blame parents. I think it's bad parenting. You got to teach your kids to respect other kids.
I would agree. Yeah. And it was interesting. Like, I don't think my parents knew a lot about it because I've been really blessed with really great parents. Yeah. So home was always kind of a sanctuary, and I always felt very valued there. But it's interesting later in life to kind of pick apart how it affects you.
The story perpetuates itself if you think about it. Like, we have the situation where, throughout history, you hear about these kids who are bullied to become these, amazing leaders in society and world changers. I mean, Elon famously was bullied at Pretoria Boys High School, I think, in South Africa, and through just at the tail end of apartheid, and so even though he wasn't black, but there was a lot of just the people there were just kind of weird.
Yeah, I have a theory on why that is, which is that for most people, there's a lot of value in fitting in.
Yeah.
And if something in your life beats out of you that there's any value in fitting in, it frees you up to stick out in a good way, to be exceptional. Because I think folks who have the capacity to be exceptional, some of them don't want to be because they don't want to be a weirdo in that way. And in some ways, I think it can push you to be in kind of a lonely place. And so and you see that, I think, also with like immigrant populations as well. Like, I mean, I've spoken to other folks who are Jewish who, what is the basis of Jewish exceptionalism that some people acknowledge, and that is like having both an intellectual tradition and there's no value in fitting in because you'll never fit in. So you might as well just do your best, right? And the combination of the two leads people to do some outside stuff.
It's similar to, I guess, you have all these different cultures, kind of going off topic here, but all the different cultures around the world have these different push for different things, right? So I mean, I know just being Indian, born in South Africa, like my parents raised me with the same kind of ethos that I think the Indian families raise their kids. It's like education's the most important thing. You know, you'll never be broke if you're well educated. You have to like study and learn and etc. And so, and you hear all these stories about how successful people, how their parents sacrifice everything for them to go to the best schools, to go to universities, even though like they're working 2 jobs to pay it. And I'd say a lot of cultures have that mindset around education. And then there are a lot of cultures who just, they don't, and that's fine. And through hardship comes like, the sacrifice for your family and and whatever else. And, the desire for a better life.
Yep.
And so, and I think every culture has a different perspective on what that means. Like some cultures are, you have to get a job and work in a company your whole life and never leave. And if you don't do that, you'll disappoint your parents, or you have to become an accountant, or you have to become a doctor. So, and throughout, I guess, history, we're finding out what the best opportunities are for people based upon like the outcomes of those different approaches.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me actually of like two different sort of interesting interviews or speeches that I saw. One was many years ago, Dean Kamen, the Segway inventor and stuff, and First Robotics. And a lot of he was very passionate about First Robotics. And,
do you remember what he called Segway, the code name was?
No, I forgot.
Ginger,
yes. Okay. The thing that he was talking about with First Robotics is how much, in certain aspects, especially of American culture, like success is viewed as like joining the NBA or or even.
Well, you're right. Some cultures are sports driven, extremely sports driven.
That's right. But those are they're not exactly 0-sum games, but they're very hard to win. There's only so many NBA players, only so many Formula One drivers or whatever it is. And if you double down on education, like you're playing a game that has a lot of good outcomes for everybody.
Exactly.
And so I think it ends up being like a much better bet.
So I mean, let's talk about that for a sec. I mean, it's either become a superstar sports player or whatever, be well educated, or get into a trade.
Yep.
Often is it, or take over the family business, or do what, like a lot of families don't think education is that important, and they'd rather have the kids take over their farm or whatever it is, like continue their way of life. And there's no criticism here. No. Like I like whatever you think is best for your family and your lifestyle. I think is important to you perpetuate those values. But I will say that there are different odds that you can place on the outcomes. Like there's been one Lionel Messi in the past couple of decades,
and it's great to be him.
It's great to be him. And you can argue, well, Ronaldo's making some money. Yeah, great. There's a dozen of them, but like there's a billion soccer fans, so the chances are very slim. But guess what? There's probably, I guess, tens of millions of doctors in the world.
That's right.
And they're all doing really well, I'm sure.
Right.
And whether they're doing well financially or not, they love what they do, and they're smart people, and they're providing a service to society.
Yep.
So I guess I think it's like a lot of success in life is based on circumstance and culture that you're raised in, and what the cultural norms are.
Yep. A
lot of people who are really smart may be typecast or sort of get stuck in their family business but even though they don't want to do it, they don't have a choice for, maybe one of their parents is sick or whatever reason, and that's the path they follow in life. And I guess from a life perspective, you follow the journey you're on in life, and you just deal with things as it comes, and you make the best decisions you can. And there's not much more you can do. If you ask me, like, Vinny, what would you have changed in your life all the way back? And I had to say to you, well, I would have like done this and that and that. The ripple effect of that would mean that we would not be having this conversation right now.
It's huge. I mean, I think, at this point, middle-aged, I can look back on my career, and it's been amazing. And I never planned for any of it.
Yeah.
Like the entire thing has just been me following my nose, pivoting when circumstances change, and having a good head for, I think, what will work and what will work for me. But like, as I'm, it's weird because I'm at a moment right now where I'm between gigs and trying to figure out what to do next. And it's been a while since I've had to like answer the question, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But I always remind myself that I still don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really good to keep that mindset.
With that in mind, like I always reiterate what Steve Jobs said. He says, with the dots, you can connect the dots looking backwards, not forwards.
Right.
All these little events in your life, they don't make sense. But when you get older, you look back, that makes sense in the context of where I am right now. And so I think that's very powerful. But let's keep going.
When I was 10, my life took a real left turn when my parents decided to move us out of Chicago. So my dad had been it wasn't until my brother was born 4 years after me, my first brother, that he even like took a full-time job. And he took a job in the insurance industry back in IT when it was called
IT.
back before it was called IT, when it was called office automation.
Okay.
And he did really well because he's a sharp guy and he can learn very quickly, and that's always been a field that rewards people in that way. But he got kind of stifled by the corporate culture. So it was about 6 years into that when he decided, you know what, I want to make a change. We want to get out of the city. And he ended up going into business with my grandfather, not his father, but his father-in-law. Okay. And so we moved out of Chicago about 50, 60 miles northwest to a town called Woodstock. And Woodstock is sort of like right on the edge of the metro area.
Is this the Woodstock from like the city?
No, not at all. It's actually interesting. It's the Woodstock where Groundhog's Day was filmed. When they went to film it in Pennsylvania, it was actually filmed in Woodstock.
Tony Phil.
That was my junior year of high school. The film crews were there. Bill Murray was running around. It's always fun to watch the movie.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's a good movie.
But we moved to Woodstock, and suddenly I was in a regular school. Like I dropped into 5th grade, and I was, like it was mostly a bunch of white kids. There were a few Hispanics. There had been a Jewish kid, but he had actually just moved away 2 weeks before I got there. Like over the winter break, he had moved away to Carlsbad. So it's like this weird full circle thing, and not far from where I live now. He actually
connect the dots going back.
Yeah, no, it's weird. He came back for high school and we became close friends. So there's like this whole long journey there. But it was weird because I was sort of like, wow, I'm not like these people. And at lunch, like the kids would fight. Yeah. That was like just a thing they did, like for fun, and I'd never seen that before ever. Like the smart kids don't fight, like at the gifted school, there's no fights, and this was like who's going to fight who, and I was like, where am I? Like, and so it was really this sort of deep culture shock, and like we were doing math.
What state was this in?
It was in Illinois. It was just right outside Chicago.
Okay.
Like Woodstock's on a commuter train line. It was like the second to last on one of the far out spokes. It was like close enough to the city to be sort of part of Chicago, but there were farms between Woodstock and the next town, so it wasn't quite a suburb, right? Like it's 14,000 people, small enough that you don't know everybody, but you know a lot of people, and a small place. And I was in Woodstock all through high school. Yeah. What that meant for me a lot was that school was really easy, like really easy. Like I don't think I even did homework till I got to high school. No, that's not true. At least in 5th grade, I didn't actually do a single piece of homework because everything they gave me, I could just like get it done in 5 minutes while I was sitting there. And this is a bit of foreshadowing because when I got to college and things got really hard, suddenly I was like, I don't actually know how to do this work, because I graduated in the top 10% of my class from high school, was involved in like every extracurricular activity that you can imagine. And like by my senior year, I could freely roam the halls because all the teachers knew that I was like one of the good, smart kids, and I probably had somewhere to be. Like no one ever asked me for a hall pass. I could literally just kind of roam around. So I had a good time.
Would you say you're the most successful kid coming out of your high school?
Maybe. My really good friend, Brian Swetland, he's the kind of the creator of Android. He was like employee number 1 at Android.
Maybe you're second.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a nice job. And my other, and my friend Cameron, the one who was in 5th grade and like moved here and then moved back, like he's the executive director of APAC in Israel. So it's like our little group of friends has actually been pretty successful, probably because we were like the smart nerdy kids.
Well, it's funny. Like a lot of that comes down to time and place.
It really does.
It was really. I look at my high school. My year, I think, was probably the most successful year of the high school's history. Yeah. Out of 100 years plus of history, we've got engineers, scientists. One of the top law firm owners in South Africa, and like it was interesting because it was the peak for South Africa. Because in 1991, obviously apartheid came crumbling down. 94, we had the elections. The new government took over ANC, so it was a democratic state at that point. And then in 96, they changed the rules around teachers and pay across the country. And I'd say 80% of the teachers we had in that year left the country because they were kind of normalizing pay between all the schools. Which I'm not judging that, but like they just said, I'm not going to take the salary you guys are offering me, and they went to Australia, England, wherever else. And then kind of the education levels and standards kind of dropped in South Africa over the next 25, 30 years, as you can imagine, with an exodus of great teachers. Some good teachers stayed. I don't think it was enough. And then, but that was part of it. It was just like, our group of kids went through this this transition period of apartheid, and it just, I think, gave them a different perspective on the world. And out of the 180 kids in my class, I think I'd say at least 20 or 30 went on to do some really great things.
That's amazing.
It's quite impressive. One is the top jazz drummer in the world at some point, and it's quite interesting.
Nice.
But it's weird how it coalesces around a certain point in time for various reasons.
Yes.
And then so you met these guys in your all at school at the same time as you. Right, obviously.
Yeah. We sort of came together as a group in high school.
In high school, right? And then you disappear, and then you're much else ever. It was that weird one point in time.
Yeah.
So I see this happening often. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of a weird cosmic thing.
I mean, one of the nice things about Woodstock High School at the time, we did have some really great teachers. It wasn't an exceptional school, but there were a few that were really
passionate,
inspiring, like our chemistry teacher, Mr. Lichtenheld, our social studies teachers.
I Mr. Slaughter for math.
Yeah, nice.
I know. It's they are so pedantic about everything. They're so dedicated.
Yes.
Everything. They never slip up.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever saw him slip up once.
See, it's funny, when I got to 5th grade, I had to correct the teacher on her arithmetic. I was like, where am I that I have to
I did
try to do this stuff right?
So a funny story about that. Yeah. I was in university my first year, and the professor who put this problem in, it was in information systems, and he actually gave us the problem, and then we were reviewing in class, and he couldn't solve the problem himself, so he called me up to help him. These things happen.
They do. They do.
It happens. But he's like, I don't know what I was doing here.
Yeah. There was so high school was fairly easy. It let me sort of engage the Renaissance side of myself. I ended up being the editor of the newspaper. I was in the school plays. I wrestled. I did.
That's cool.
All these different things.
Very involved.
Because I had a lot of spare capacity.
I was the same.
And I graduated basically like a B+ student. Right at the tail end of the top 10%. I applied to 2 colleges, to MIT and to University of Illinois. Didn't get into MIT,
really,
unsurprisingly. And I think that
I'm sure they're regretting it right now. If anyone from MIT is watching, they should give you an honorary degree.
I mean, I've had the chance to go back to MIT and recruit there.
I've spoken
and speak at the media lab, all that. And I think that it's probably good I didn't go down. I was not.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go to Harvard. That was my thing. Harvard is the place I wanted to go. And by luck and chance, I did an executive course there a couple of years ago, and it actually felt kind of good.
I had a speaking gig once at HBS, and I was like,
it was just cool, I grew up idolizing Harvard, and I always wanted to go, but I just don't think I could afford 2 years of my life there. Yeah.
Ironically, now it probably would be Stanford instead of MIT for me, just because of how West Coast I've been. Yeah. But I do love MIT.
I still like the Harvard. I actually just the method, the case study is the way the way it's done. I really enjoyed that.
And so I got really lucky though, because it's funny, as I was applying, I had the test scores and all that to get into U of I very, very, very easily. And I remember deciding what I wanted to study, and it was really a toss-up between at the time aerospace engineering and philosophy. Those were the 2 I was considering, and I decided.
Tough one there. Because and I actually mean that not facetiously. It's a tough one because one challenges. They're both in some ways extreme.
Yes.
But they're very high level thinking.
Yeah.
So it's high level thinking. So one is known knowns, and the other one is unknown unknowns.
Yes.
And you're trying to figure these 2 things out, right?
No, and so I ended up opting to go to the engineering school. So I was accepted into aerospace engineering. Okay. I took a year off to go. Actually, I was in Israel for a year, living in the desert, learning how to weld, just kind of working on a year program.
Which desert?
The northern Negev, so just sort of a bit west of Gaza, between Gaza and Beersheba, a place called Kibbutz Urim. Okay. That was a good experience. When I came back, I had changed my mind not to go to philosophy, but actually just switch to computer engineering. And I went and saw a dean, and they let me switch to computer engineering before I started classes. Oh, wow. So when I entered, it was actually in computer engineering, more on the hardware side than the software side, even though the software side is where I ultimately ended up.
What languages did you program in?
I didn't. It's funny. I didn't even really learn to program in school. The only language that I had a C++ lab and Scheme. I was actually the last unit to be taught the fundamentals of programming in Scheme before they switched to Java. Okay. But in my first stint, I was only there 2 years. And the deal that I had with my parents was that they would pay for school at the state school level. So if I was going to go to MIT, I would have to borrow money or whatever. But if I was going to go to U of I, they'd pay the whole thing, full freight. But I needed to maintain a B average with no grade below a C. And that was fine for the first year. My third semester was kind of rough. And I had like a class that came in incomplete. And so that dragged down my GPA. I was on academic probation. And my parents were like, look, you know, we had a deal here and you did not, like, you got a D and like all this stuff. And I was like, and I wasn't going to class. Like I really was not very engaged in college.
What were you doing instead?
Drugs, like hallucinogens, just hanging out. I was in an improv troupe. Like it wasn't like, I was working, like I was actually working for the university doing tech support. Like, so all those things, just not going to class, like basically.
I was the same, but it wasn't drugs, it was alcohol and girls.
there were definitely girls in the mix too. Yes, 100%. And so that was semester number 3. And so we came up with a deal, which was double or nothing, which was that semester 4 was really gonna apply myself, and we changed it so that it was like no grade below a B.
Yeah.
I got dumped right before finals.
Oh shit!
In the third semester, I got a 1.08.
Oh, wow.
GPA in my fourth
You were
semester.
a wreck, weren't you?
Yeah, I did. I just didn't go to class.
How did you deal with that? Like, what is the mental sort of mindset you're in?
I was okay. Like, it was sort of like I actually had like 2 stacked up breakups that I was kind of getting over, but mostly I was like just playing video games and hanging out. Like, I wasn't being like terribly self-destructive. I just didn't want to go to class at all.
I remember writing my second year exams at the university, and there was a riot on campus, gunshots being fired, and every 5 seconds, pens down. And they were like, you know, because it got really bad. And like, I don't think I did very well on that paper. I did like, I can imagine, like 70% or whatever. But it was kind of like freaky because like these people are running on campus shooting each other and rubber bullets and stuff. And like,
that's not the best ever. I had no excuse. Zero excuse. Things were pretty idyllic. In Champaign.
It's a different emotional state, right? You can have this like this state of mind when you're in the exam and you've like, kind of prepared, you know what you're doing, and like this distraction comes in there, or like I don't think you prepared going in because you were just like a total wreck, right? So
well, and the kind of work that like what I learned about myself, like almost right afterwards, was that the classroom environment wasn't good for me, and I came back to
that's
school.
a common story.
I came back to school 7 years later, much more serious, paying for it myself.
Yeah,
and I could get it done, but it still wasn't fun. Like I couldn't. It was a real struggle, and I was like, okay, I sort of gave myself the previous version of myself a pass. It was like you weren't going to be good at this no matter what. So I dropped out. This was like mid '97. And I had been interested in programming, and I was learning some of that stuff on my own. The early kind of like systems administration at the time amongst the people I hung out with, like everybody had to run their own Linux box. Like we had gotten an ISDN line from the university, so we actually
ISDNs.
We were
128K.
So fast, so fast.
Yeah, and then you could run 2 together as well.
Well, we just had one, but we got 13 static IPs, so we had like, hosts on the internet.
Oh,
like,
wow.
it was a big deal.
You can host websites now.
Yeah,
That's
no,
awesome.
totally. It was. The
DNS would resolve. Like,
100%. Like it was great. And so there had been a company started by another U of I dropout a couple of years earlier called Neoglyphics Media Corporation, and that was in Chicago. This guy, Alex Zoglin, had been in the Navy and then come back to school and dropped out to start a web agency once he saw that was like a thing to do. And it was a mix of sort of the design side, but also like the development side. So they were doing things that in '97 were very innovative, like connecting a website to a database, which was like, really cutting edge stuff.
That was pre-access.
Yeah, no. It was like, and even then, like,
or maybe actually Access
existed, but you couldn't use Access online. It was like it was like Oracle or nothing. It was before I think MySQL had just been invented. So
no, MySQL's out. Oh, you're right. MySQL just came out then. But you had SQL before that.
SQL Server.
The SQL Server, and then you had PowerScript.
FoxPro.
No, Sybase SQL.
Yes.
Sybase had the SQL product as well.
Yep.
And it was called PowerScript.
Yep.
But yeah, I know I used to code in that.
That's
right.
So a few years earlier, I had worked for my dad's business in Access, building like internal applications for them. And the database work was sort of my first.
And kids listening to us, they have no idea what we're talking about, and they don't understand our pain.
Yeah,
I mean, like you probably.
But also,
what was your first?
It was so cool.
Like, what was your first computer?
So, my first computer that was like mine was a Gateway. It was a Pentium.
You had a Pentium, okay.
Pentium 200. Like, so we had a Jacquard 500, which was a mini computer from the 70s that my parents had. So we had that at home, but like you can do anything.
Did you ever have a ZX Spectrum?
No, I didn't have a Spectrum. Like this,
I had a Spectrum and a Commodore 64, and like the Spectrum keyboard is so shitty. It was like these rubber buttons you push and you like type slowly, and it had no memory on board. The one I had, so like you couldn't.
It was just like a terminal.
It was like a terminal, and then like memory was expensive, so I had to buy it separately, and then I couldn't afford it. And the one day I was like, I think it was the Spectrum. It might have been the Commodore actually. The Commodore, same problem. You had a tape drive, and you had to back up to the tape drive all the code very slowly. And I spent like, I don't know, days writing this code. 'Cause I used to write software programs to teach myself schoolwork. So, for example, I'd write a program where I'd insert all the capital cities of the world and all the countries, and I'd run a script to like, okay, ping me questions, and I'd just run it for like half an hour, whatever, every day, prepare for exams. And when exams come, I knew every answer because it's like flashcards basically.
No, totally. In high school, I think the only real programming I was doing was on the TI-85, but I made some wild stuff on those calculators in the basic there. I did end up borrowing a couple computers from some friends, so I had like a IBM convertible, which was this like really early laptop.
I kind of remember that one.
And I had...
It wasn't the PS2, was it?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
And then I had an Amiga. Amiga 1000 that I borrowed from a friend for a number of years.
Well, how far have we come? I mean, like you look at the phones of today. Like,
yes.
Like the new iPhone 15 is more powerful than like I think every computer produced in that era combined.
I remember seeing a stat about the iPhone 13 that if you were holding two of them in your hands, you had more processing power than every Apple IIe ever produced in just those two units.
That's insane.
It's like my watch has more computing power than what went to the moon.
It's crazy.
But my first one, I remember this was when I was working for my dad. Like I bought it sort of through the business, and it was like a Pentium 200. It had 32 megabytes of RAM. I sprung for like the 1 gigabyte hard drive, and man, did I love that machine. That was like very, very exciting.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. Yeah. So you were in college. You were studying. You went back to college. You were studying for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, like the fast forward there is like I dropped out. I started working for Neoglyphics. I taught myself to program in that job. They hired me at like $9 an hour, and then 6 months later they hired me full time and gave me a salary. And at that point I was a programmer and worked at a bunch of different places. Moved to California. Had a failed startup in there, which we can
tell me about the startup.
Yeah, so I was at Neoglyphics for about 2 years. Neoglyphics was doing really innovative work, and then at some point they got bought out by a company called Renaissance Technologies, which was like an IT body shop. And they didn't know how to manage these people and find the kind of projects that they wanted to do. And so the place kind of started atrophying, and I saw the writing on the wall. And I was like, okay, I got to get out of here. And it was 2000, or it was 99. Total
.com bubble.
It was like everywhere you look, $20 million checks.
$20 million on a napkin business plan. Yeah.
And so my dad decided to take a go at it. And we had moved out so he could work with my grandfather, who ran a precast concrete factory. We're building components, and the factory went under because it was not well managed before my dad got there, and he sort of helped with that. And they set up a brokerage shop because they took their jobs and that they couldn't do when they shut down and got it to other people.
Okay.
And suddenly they're just doing purely the information work for the jobs, and they're like, oh, well, we can actually make money doing this. So they set up a brokerage where they would do all the knowledge work and then job out the manufacturing to different places. And along the way, learned a lot about that kind of sort of custom manufacturing for architectural projects. And so he conceived of this thing called heavyware. And the idea with heavyware was that a lot of this custom manufacturing for construction produces very durable tooling, but it's actually just used for like one job, right? And especially like in like the metal fabrication space, the example we used was a fabricator we knew that had produced 6 13-foot tall bronze columns for the former governor of Alabama's house, right? And like these are beautiful molds, and they were just going to be made to make 6 columns.
Paid by taxpayer money or not?
No. It was a private project. But the point being that like they spent all the money making the molds for these columns, and they were only going to make 6 of them. And but the molds could produce tens of thousands of them if they wanted to. And as long as it's not going up across the street, nobody cares. Yeah. So the idea was to put together this sort of aggregated catalog of small manufacturers who had this durable tooling laying around that they didn't want to throw out, and then sell that into architectural projects as sort of like lower risk components that you could use. Our timing was bad. We also didn't know what we were doing. So we ended up ultimately didn't get funded.
So you didn't find it at all?
No, I mean, he on his own dime, like out of the other company, sort of, we got to about 9 people, and we started building the website and the database and stuff, and like
What do you think caused like what was just no traction, no interest?
a lot of it was timing. Like we just really started our funding push in April of 2000, and it was just like everyone had decided to stop writing checks.
Yeah.
And then also it was just being kind of like first-time entrepreneurs that didn't fit the mold of what they were looking for.
Did you feel like you sacrificed a lot to get there?
I didn't. I think my dad did. I mean, he ended up putting one business in debt for that, and then ended up kind of working to get out of, like, to make sure that everyone was paid. And I think that
Did you feel any like sense of responsibility for that?
Not me personally. I mean, I was 20. Like I was, 21, something like that. So I was just kind of like the hotshot kid that could like knew how computers work and can make things happen. It's funny, sort of having been a CTO now and looking back on it, like. Both understanding how crazy that funding environment was and how hard it was to even build things those days, but also just how much VC in general, isn't really into taking risks, especially if you come at them with something that's somewhat non-traditional that could produce value.
So, VCs operate in multiple stages. You got the pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, D, etc. And the highest risk ones are the pre-seed VCs. They just like the founder, write a check, whatever else. And the lowest risk ones are the Series D. It's like, it's about IPO, it's got revenues, etc. And so you have this like spectrum of risk appetite in VC. And what I find in my career is that most VCs, they talk a good game about like what they would invest in, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to the metrics for them.
It does, and I think. And having a defensible position for the investments they make, because
maybe
their customers are the
maybe
LPs.
but I'm not sure I totally agree with that, because in boom times like 2021, they were investing in shit that wasn't defensible and they're just throwing money around because.
But it was defensible because everybody else was doing it, right? So it's like when there's a trend, like right now, AI is hot. Like
the AI investors have been burnt this past year. A lot of AI investors put money into like overhyped things, and
I remember,
and they're licking their wounds right now, and that's why the AI market's kind of gone down in terms of investment, because they've taken a lot of hits already.
I think it was 2006 when Google bought YouTube. And it was really kind of like baffling to me that like suddenly video was hot. Everyone was investing in video. I was like, isn't this over? Like, isn't it? Haven't we like dubbed the winner?
17 years later, we're looking at this going, well, it's definitely not over.
Yeah. So it's interesting to sort of watch. I don't want to say like herd mechanics exactly, but just understanding what the incentive structures are for the VCs, especially when they're trying to like raise a second fund. If they really go out on a limb and it doesn't work out, they're not going to get the next fund filled. So I understand that reticence, but it's sometimes at odds with the rhetoric of like, we're building the future here.
When it comes to VCs, I really believe the power law is well applied to the industry. The top 10% of VCs make the majority of the money. The other 90% make virtually nothing in terms of returns. I think they barely beat the market. I mean, you look at the upper quartile, and then I think the break-even points to the upper quartile, and everything else is kind of a loss or a wash.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some folks have studied this pretty rigorously. Dave Klur.
From 500 Startups.
Yeah, I was fortunate once to like share, sit next to him on a plane ride home from a conference, and we had a pretty deep conversation. He sort of explained what he was doing there, and it made a lot of sense to me. He was like, "Look, we need to invest in enough companies to see where this becomes statistical."
Well, he was just playing it. It's called the efficient frontier curve. So he was just saying, look, a whole bunch of high beta opportunities put together, eventually create a smooth curve.
Yep.
Which helps you reduce the risk across the portfolio. And it's a good strategy. It works. I mean, you do that for any type of portfolio management. You can if you buy enough high risk assets and put it together, eventually you have quite a smooth return curve.
Yeah.
As long as the risks are somewhat correlated, I guess.
Yeah, but I think that isn't the way that a lot of the bigger VC firms operate.
I mean, we don't make this whole VC conversation today, but like we could probably spend hours talking about VCs. But funding companies is never easy.
Yeah.
And if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for funding, you got to focus on the metrics. Yep. So either it's user growth or it's revenues.
Yeah.
If you're not growing either, you're not going to get funding. Very few VCs care about the deep tech. They say they do, and maybe the seed investors do, but the later ones, they don't care about the technology as much. They care about what's the market traction, and whether that's doesn't always have to be revenues, but it has to be user growth.
Yeah, no, at least some sort of growth metric there. Yeah. So continuing the fast forward, Heavyweight didn't work out. I ended up moving to California in August of 2000, which most people say is right when .com really started unraveling.
That was just after September 11th. That was like a month later.
No, 2000, a year earlier.
Oh, sorry,
no, 2001. So, but that was when like all the companies started failing. And but when you're in it, it wasn't apparent at the moment. It's only like you look back a year or two later, and then it becomes apparent. So, moved out to California. I was sort of the last of my group of friends from college to do so. Got a job within 3 weeks running all of the like internal IT and engineering networks for a company called Zemboo Labs. And Zemboo was trying to do virtualization or do something
before
like
EMC,
before AWS, and like before you had actual virtualized kernels didn't exist. So it was more like virtualized racks. It was a really interesting company filled with super smart people. And
they say in the VC world, too early is the same as being wrong.
That's right. No, and that's really what happened. I mean, the idea was actually just sell these services to the .coms, and the .coms sort of disappeared. And then it was an attempt to pivot to enterprise services for large global enterprises that needed the same kind of distributed footprint. The whole point really was like Akamai, but not for static content, for database content, and figuring out how to do that. So that was fun. Then 2002 was a bit of the doldrums. I had a couple little jobs that weren't terribly notable, and then I landed at SourceForge.net.
So that's like the GitHub's original.
Yes. So yes, for those who don't know, like it was GitHub before there was a GitHub. It was at the time when I joined it, the world's largest open source software archive, and it was the place where you'd go to host all of your projects. I hadn't built the place. I came in and I was like the site maintainer and worked both on the network side and on the website side. And I was there for about 3 years in total. But during that time, I decided to go back to school. So I was sort of looking around. I'd been in California for a while and had met a woman who really was very ambitious. And I had not really understood ambition before then. And it was like this moment when I was like 27, 20, I was like, oh, I should like try, And I was like, okay, well, I'm not married. I have no kids. I have no real obligations. If I want to open up various doors, I should go back to school. And
so you did that?
So I moved back to Illinois because that was the easiest path to go. And they were like, yeah, you can just continue your studies. And I was like, okay, cool. So I came back at 29. I was like running SourceForge. When I came back, like all the kids in the department were like, wow, you're like old and cool and have a job at a website that we know. Like they literally asked me to be the leader of the student organization, the Association for Computing Machinery, a huge chapter at U of I, does a lot of project work. It's actually the way a lot of people learn how to do stuff. And so I was there I had 4 semesters to go, basically, to finish my degree. And in my 3rd semester, ACM was holding a job fair. And the guy, and I realized, I was like, oh, I think I'm a graduating senior. Because when I went back to school, I was like, maybe I want to be an academic, maybe I want to be a lawyer, maybe I want to go to business school. I realized that all the lawyers I knew really loved law school, but didn't like being lawyers. And I was like, okay, maybe not. And the kind of law that I wanted to do would be like constitutional law. And I was like way too late in the game to be on that kind of a path. And business school, those were not my people. I didn't really want to spend 3 years hanging out with them. I kind of figured that out by hanging out with them a bit during my undergrad time. And being an academic, because of like my previous GPA, the only way I was going to do that was undergraduate research at U of I and then stay in Champaign, which is a lovely place to be, but I had already lived there for 4 or 5 years and had been on the West Coast. And I was like, I don't really want to be here anymore. So I got to get out of here. And so I was like, okay, I think I need to go find a job. So I'm at this job fair and I was like—
So you went to the school for how long?
So I've done like 7 out of 8 semesters.
Okay, so you went back for a semester, then you decided to get
I went back for 3 semesters.
Oh, 3 semesters. Okay.
Yeah, in the second stint.
All right, cool.
And at that job fair, I went and I talked to Google, I talked to Morgan Stanley, and all of them are like, your GPA isn't high enough for us to even interview you as a student.
It's just snobs.
Yeah, and I was like, and like I get the policies. I've run college recruiting programs, but it was just sort of like, okay, but like I have 7 years of experience. You're like, this is college recruiting. You're in a different category. If you want to submit your resume the regular route, we can talk that way. I was like, okay, fine. So the guy running the job fair came to me, and he was like, hey, there's this little company here. Seems like they're working on something interesting, but no one's really talking to them. Can you print out a resume and go talk to them just to make them feel better? I was like, sure, whatever. So that was Palantir.
How big's Palantir today? It's like
Palantir's about
$50 billion company?
Yeah. And they're one of the leading companies now for deploying AI.
Yeah, they practically owned Palo Alto.
Yes.
They're like every single startup was pushed out of Palo Alto because they took up every single bit of office space.
It's a golden age, man.
Yeah,
it was great. It was fantastic. I mean,
I was pissed with them, but because I had my startup, then we couldn't get space, and we were like,
I had a house in Menlo Park because to have the 7-minute commute. Like it was that was great.
And that was actually their stated policy is like we just want to take over Palo Alto.
Yeah. Well, they recently like relocated stuff. A lot of the center of gravity has moved to London, and the headquarters have moved to Denver. So their footprint is still there. They still have the main building and a couple other buildings, but it's much smaller than it used to be.
So what employee number were you at Palantir?
12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it was interesting because they immediately were like, "Oh, you know how to ship software?" I was like, "Yeah, I've done that." They're like, "Cool, we want to talk to you," and they took me out to breakfast like the next day, and I was dating a girl in California. They were like, "Do you want to fly out to interview?" I'm like, still not sure who these people are or what they're doing, and I was like, "Do I get a rental car and a hotel room?" They were like, "Sure." I was like, "Sure, I'll do whatever interview you want for a free trip to California." And so I went out and but the interview was good. Like I met some really interesting folks. And
obviously, Joe was there, and you met Joe.
And Joe was there. Stefan. I didn't meet Karp at that time, but Karp did call me a couple times before I got hired. Yeah. I met Akash Jain, who runs a lot of the business now, and Bob McGrew, who's now the head of research.
Peter Thiel was an early investor as well, right?
Yeah, but Peter, it's funny. Like Peter's name often ends up synonymous with Palantir, but at least during my time there, and from reports after I left, like Peter was never involved day to day. He was always like, "This is a thing that needs to exist in the world," and it helped sort of shepherd, I think, a lot on the financing side, but he was not a real presence in the company at any that was visible to anyone. But the thing about the interview that was really interesting is I was like, whoa, these are really smart people, and they're very humble. Like they're biting off this really big problem, and they don't know how to solve it, and they're not afraid to admit that they don't know how to solve it. They're just gonna work on it until they figure it out. And I was like, "This sounds awesome."
What is this stated goal back then? What are they trying to
do? So the real genesis was around the September 11th attacks, and the simple thesis was that. The September 11th was really bad, but what was even worse is the political reaction cycles that come after terrorism, which is to sort of deprive people of liberty in the name of security. Yep. And the insight from looking at by
that measure, COVID was a terrorist attack too.
Yeah, sure, certainly. By that, the 9/11 Commission basically, through their investigations and the report, showed that the government knew everything that it needed to know, that the attacks were going to happen, but couldn't exploit the information properly. And that through sort of classical investigative techniques could have uncovered and foiled this plot ahead of time. There was no need.
But the bureaucracy prevented it.
That's right. There was no need for mass surveillance. There was no need to deprive anybody of any kind of privacy whatsoever.
Can we tee up the Patriot Act?
I mean, this was the whole point was to avoid that. I mean, this was really the original, and it's ironic because over the years, Palantir has been painted as sort of like the dark horse of surveillance, and it was like nothing in some ways could be further from the truth. The idea was to build a system to be able to actually use all the information that you have.
Peter Thiel's a libertarian, so this makes sense. It kind of aligns with his values.
That's right, and that's ultimately that's where the book came from as well, like that focus on it. And so that to me was very compelling. I mean, it was 2005. Okay. The global war on terror was going on. It was still a thing that
war in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, like someone needs to up our game in this domain and really build. Like this looks like a software problem. Like this is all about giving people tools to move through large amounts of information very quickly and do analysis. And everybody who was there for that reason, like very, very focused on the mission and saying, okay, like we're in a race to kind of save civil liberties by building better software. It was very exciting heady time. Like it was great to show up there and.
Well, so you spent 10 years there?
10 years. Yeah,
amazing. And then did you leave before the IPO or after?
I did. I left about 5 or 6 years before the IPO.
And then you went to Kairos Aerospace.
Kairos Aerospace, yes.
And tell us about that quickly.
Well, I mean, there's a real clear through line for me from Palantir to Kairos. Like I joined Palantir because it was like this is the pressing problem in the world today is how do we like deal with terrorism without depriving people of liberty. 10 years later, like Palantir was working on a lot of different stuff, and I got kind of like I was still a valued member of the team there, but I was kind of a little bit off to the side, and I got kind of bored. But I didn't really think about leaving because when you're in that place, in this heady mix with access to these amazing problems to work on where you feel like you're making a real impact on the world, it's really hard to care about anything else, like really hard to care about anything else. And so I met this guy, Steve Diker, he was actually, he was the boyfriend at the time. They later got married with one of my colleagues, Ann Sandman, who worked at Palantir. And we, like a bunch of us, like 4 couples, went out up to Yountville to go out to, Thomas Keller's.
Wine tasting, the French Laundry, the whole thing.
And then literally Steve and I met, like we were strolling through the gardens of the French Laundry and talking about, I don't even remember what it was, but like clearly there's this moment where like, hey, you're a pretty smart guy and you're nice to talk to. Like, and like it was like this mutual respect immediately developed. And so a few years later, he had been at Lockheed Martin. He's like an astrophysicist by training. And he and his colleague from there, Brian Jones, they were thinking about starting a company, and they had found some research about methane leaks and the distribution of the size of leaks on oil fields that basically said it looks like most of the emissions come from a very small number of large leaks in this large area. Okay. And what's needed is an economical system to find them, right? If you can find them quickly.
So how do you find methane leaks in an oil field? I mean, it's a freaking oil field. How do you find an actual leak?
Yeah. So the answer is you build an optimized spectrometer that because it's methane's invisible in the visible spectrum. Okay. But it does absorb light in the infrared spectrum. So there's a certain molecules have certain
energies.
There's
a signature that you can.
That's right. And so basically, Kairos designed a spectrometer using some off-the-shelf components, but properly tuned to be able to peer with high resolution at one part of the infrared spectrum.
How much ground can you cover with one of those?
So the original system, the swath was about a half-mile wide. Okay. You strap it to a Cessna. We could cover somewhere between 50 to 100 square miles a day.
Okay, that's amazing.
Which is pretty good.
You basically cover. Okay.
Yeah. The challenge was that.
And so, what was the business model? You'd go to companies, sign them up to check for leaks.
Yeah, and we thought really hard actually about the privacy for those companies as well. The idea was like, you want us to check your stuff, so you give us the location of all the assets that you want us to check is sort of the GIS data about where your facilities are. We'll plug that into flight planning. We'll come up with flight plans that make sure to cover all of that. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go look for leaks. And if we find a leak, we'll look at it and try to attribute it. And if it's attributed to your equipment, we'll tell you. We'll say,
so did I pay on a per leak basis, or did I pay?
We tried. There were a lot of different business models. Yeah, that have been tried. That there have been some bounty models that were experimented with. They didn't work out so well.
Of the public toilets, you put money into. Do you ever have those?
No.
And so in South Africa, we had public toilets where you're going to go to the bathroom, you put like a 1 rand coin in or whatever it is. You've got to have leaks. So that's pay per leak, right?
No, it'd be interesting. There's all different kinds of ways you can do it because it's interesting. Like these leaks are just product leaking into the atmosphere, and so it's like, well, what if we just got a cut of what you recover? Like there were all different kinds of things that we tried, but mostly. We settled on fee for service because that was sort of the simplest way to do it. And we would take on the flight planning risk, and then it was sort of like price per asset because it was just an easy way to sort of understand.
So, talk me through you were the first investor and an advisor there. You joined as CTO. What is the journey like? It's been a while now. You've been there.
Yeah. So Steve and Brian had this idea, and they were kind of toying with whether or not they wanted to do it. And Steve came to me for advice. He was like, "We think we're going to have to do a lot of data processing." And I was like, "Are you trying to recruit me for your startup?" He's like, "No, I just want advice." And as he explained it to me and what they were planning to do, I was like, "If you can do this, is a fabulous idea. I want to write you a check." I was like, I want to, because they were teetering, and I was like, I want to push you off the ledge. I want you to go and do this. So that was like late 2013, and they quit their jobs. They went into Brian's garage, and they spent 2 years designing the hardware. It took them, we got to, the second design was the one that really worked. Once there was a working camera system, there was a need to figure out how to do the data processing. Mm-hmm. And that happened to just hit at my 10-year mark in Palantir. It was the point where Emma, my second child, started sleeping through the night, so I felt like I had spare capacity. And I got kind of bored. And it's funny, I interviewed for a VC job, a strategic VC job at a bank, and was going through that interview process. It was going really well. And I was like, they kept asking me, so why do you want this job? And I was like,
I'm not sure I do.
I'm not sure I do. And I was like, I should probably listen to that. Yeah. And then I was like, I want a job working on something big and hard and meaningful like Kairos. And then I was like, oh, I should call those guys. So I did. And they were like, yep, we're ready for you. So I came on, my original title was Director of Software Engineering, but the idea was to figure out the data processing. And there were some real challenges there in that every plane load of data, which only produces about 30 to 50 gigabytes of methane data, requires 5,000 CPU hours of processing. Wow. Which is 9 months if you pencil that out. And so it was really about figuring out how to like be a cloud native company and have zero CapEx. And we figured out how to do this in a way that was very ephemeral, where like I like to call it like software defined data centers, where like the entire processing is a program. The program instantiates computers, puts software and data on them, runs them, pulls the results off, and then destroys them. And so we could get processing done for between $300 and $500 per plane load, which was roughly 10% of the cost of the flight to begin with. So it was sort of, and it was COGS rather than any kind of CapEx or overhead. So really an interesting way to do it and really fun to build.
So where's Kairos at today?
Kairos is scaling, and they are doing really well. I mean, they're at the point where they have kind of a clear set of metrics to hit, and need to. There's some interesting things in the pipeline there that I probably shouldn't talk about, but like, you know, always looking at the next hill for how to increase the service. But really, the thing that was fantastic was that we were able to collaborate with the scientific community, getting information out there sort of on the scientific record, led to what we were very happy to see was some really enlightened rulemaking by the EPA. And so there's actually this wall of demand coming at
it's
the
great.
aerial surveyors.
Yeah, like those leaks are very costly.
They are. And
it's
look,
bad for the environment as well.
it is, and there are natural resources as a country or whatever country you're operating in. Like, it's way better for us to burn methane as a fuel, get utility out of it than to release it into the atmosphere, because CO2 is way less harmful actually than methane when you put it in the atmosphere.
And isn't there like an explosion risk as well? There's a leak?
There is. It definitely can. There can be a risk for structures that are nearby. Turns out that like in the open air,
this goes up. And,
you don't get the right stoichiometric mix of air and fuel to get an explosion. But if it goes into a structure, actually, it can cause an explosion.
Okay. Well, thanks for the journey. It's very interesting what you've done, and like I don't want to dig in too much into the Palantir stuff because I know there's a lot of like top secret stuff you worked on, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, there definitely can't talk about customers at that point in time. But what's interesting is I've actually had the opportunity to be a customer now, like years later of Palantir, and I think their products now are really fascinating.
Yeah, I've used some of that stuff before. It's pretty interesting.
And really come into their own in terms of answering the questions of what do I need to do to get my data in shape to be able to leverage AI inside the enterprise. And the answer is you need something that looks like the Foundry data platform to be able to, because the sort of the prerequisite to be able to unleash the power of AI on your internal data is data governance. You need to make sure that the AI is only seeing the data that you want it to see for that group of people, so that you're not like have your sales analysts seeing people's salaries. You can't just give the AIs all the data because they might cough it up in the wrong context. They're not well trained yet in that regard. And they have a very, very good answer for how to do data governance, and it's sort of the infrastructure that you need to be able to take care of it. And it's amazing how well positioned it was, but also that governance problem is one, even if you don't have AI, that you need a good solution for.
Yeah, makes sense. So what do you think was like the most standout moment or experience in your career? Like what really like, what was your peak, the peak of your euphoria in your career?
Well, I mean, it was probably like the most recent year at Kairos was really, I mean, I'm fortunate to be able to walk away knowing that it's in good hands and feel like what we accomplished there is pretty amazing. I mean, I set out to really put a dent in the world with that one. And as far as we can tell, it's not rigorous yet because it's hard to ever know if you've checked everyone, but Kairos has had more of a climate impact than Tesla, maybe than any company in history so far.
It's one of the things like, it's like nobody knows how many terrorist attacks like the CIA and the FBI have actually stopped. Right.
But we know how much gas we kept from going into the atmosphere. And that number is like 125 million tons of CO2e. It's like an eighth of a gigaton. It's a big number. Now, it's really easy to get humbled by that too, because even for the issue of oil-filled methane, there's still 2 orders of magnitude to scale through. So it's like you're not even close to done. It's in some ways it's more of a commentary on how much work we still have to do climate mitigation. But I definitely helped shepherd that idea from the beginning, was a key player along the way. And I now, at this moment when I'm trying to figure out what to do next in my career, I have this deep sense of satisfaction of being like, I have proved to myself that I'm the person that I hoped I was, that I could do this kind of thing. And that's a certain kind of freedom of like, I mean, maybe it doesn't help with like some of my more asshole tendencies where I'm like, now I really don't have to care what anybody thinks. But it's nice to answer that question for yourself. So in that sense, like it's all led up to right about now. And now I'm at this moment where like, I don't even know what comes next, but I'm excited.
Okay, so what's the most challenging part of your career so far?
I think it was
challenging moment.
I mean, a lot of that I think was also at Kairos, and learning how.
That's strange. So like most of your like ups and downs have been at Kairos, which is the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of really exciting moments at Palantir, but I think I had the pleasure at Palantir of really bouncing around as a free electron and working on the stuff that I had the most leverage on at different points in my period there without having the same sort of level of responsibility that I did at Kairos. So there was definitely a feeling of like a lot of weight resting on your shoulders. And when you're literally in the business of saving the world, like you can't even take anything personally because it's like the project itself is too important. There's a certain level of pressure that commitment that brings in.
Well, so, on that question, how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance?
It's a good.
Or do you not?
I mean, I do. I have at Kairos. We were blessed to like want that and try to build that into the company from the beginning. And so it was easy to guilt-free figure out how to take the time that you need. We were never a place where it was like, okay, it's going to take 100-hour work weeks. Some teams got overdriven at different points in time on that, but for the most part, it was like try to keep it under 55 hours, even in a tight week, and that was fantastic. Like,
I think any under 60 hours is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
it sounds like a lot for a lot of people, but like
keeping a 40 is hard sometimes.
Yeah, 40 is hard. It's just
really
too much work to do.
And then the other way that I've kept the work-life balance is really I really took like we went fully remote during COVID, and that. I was doing this already to some degree beforehand, but it really freed me up to do things asynchronously and do things on my own schedule. So even like back at Neoglyphics, there was a period where I was working on the software project, and I got in this rhythm where I would get up at 2 p.m. I would go hang out with people in the afternoon, go to dinner, maybe go to the bar and have one drink, and then like show up to work at 11 p.m. and then work through the night till 6 a.m. and then go to sleep. And that was like, that really worked for me.
I remember the days when I was young, I could sleep during the day. Now I wake up at like 5:30.
No, it doesn't work now when you've got kids and stuff. But for me, I've been able to sort of time shift during the day doing the synchronous stuff, the meetings, talking to people, and then having
work
a period,
at night,
from about 9 p.m.
But that's the program as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like I get my best work done at like 10 p.m. till 6 a.m.
Yeah.
I actually once parked in before you judge me, at university, we were allowed to park in the disabled bays. It was right outside there after hours. Yeah. Because it was just kind of marked during the day. And I got there at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night. There's no one there. And the bays are obviously closer to the where we do the work, the campus office. So I parked there, started at 10 o'clock at night. I finished at 6:30 a.m. the next morning. And I woke out in my car, I was like, it was clamped or was fined or something. I was like, oh my gosh.
Forgot to move it, yes.
So they started at like 6 a.m. They started ticketing anyone who's there.
So,
but I know I got so much work done that night. I was like in the zone. I had no idea.
Right. I think all the distractions go away, and somehow it's been easier for me to engage focus when I'm just a little bit tired. Like pushing that boundary of like you're going to get tired. Somehow like quiets the mind and lets me sort of really focus on stuff. So, but really breaking up the day and not feeling any kind of pressure to be like, well, these are work hours and these aren't. It's like, what are you getting done? And then you get to kind of pick your own rhythm and
leveraging people as well around you. That's one thing I think I've learned is, work-life balance is about getting stuff done, even if you're not the one doing it all. And so. The more you're able to leverage people around you, people who work for you, people even people above you in an organization to get things done, like you get judged on your ability to get things done, your action, your goals.
The outcomes.
And you don't have to be the person doing it all. You just have to be the person making sure it gets done.
That's right.
And I think people miss that, and then they try and do it all themselves, and they fail. Yeah. Because most of the time it's too much work for one person.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember talking to There was a period of time when I worked with a guy named Michael Lopp. He's written a bunch of books like Managing Humans, a few others. He's now senior management at Apple, but was also like leadership at like Slack and Pinterest for a while. And I remember like earnestly asking him, like, why would you want to go into management? And he had a really good answer.
What was it?
And that's just basically to accomplish anything that's bigger than you can do yourself.
Yes.
Right. Like, and that's what it takes. Like, and it's like, and when you're someone who can have an outside impact as an individual, sometimes it doesn't even seem that attractive. But once you figure that out, you're like, okay, like if you can't do it all, you have to sort of shift into that mode of like, how do we scale up people in collaboration with each other?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you could change one thing in your career, what would you change?
Wow. That's a tough one. It would have been really interesting to go to MIT.
Okay.
Like that would have been a whole different ride.
Knowing what you know today, would you have gone back and worked harder
Yeah.
to get in? You made the sacrifice to get in.
Yeah, and if I knew what it would take to be successful there, I've had a lot of friends who went to MIT. It's a really interesting environment, but I guess maybe that's like almost like a subheading under that sort of discovering ambition late in life. I remember coming into to Palantir, and like most of my colleagues were like 6 or 8 years younger than me. And there were a couple different feelings that gave me. One was like, I've wasted a decade. Like we're at the same starting line together. But the flip side was like they were all just graduating college, and I really took advantage of my 20s in a way that actually allowed me to show up with some experience and some perspective that was useful even in those program environments, ways to think about things differently. So there were a whole bunch of lessons that I knew that they didn't know. So it wasn't purely like regret, but that it took me a while to figure out that like it really takes like talent isn't enough. It really takes dedication and hard work and nose to the grindstone if you really want to accomplish something big. And the earlier you start, the more time you have to get it done.
I know. My biggest regret in life was not moving to the Bay Area when I turned like 18, and not studying in South Africa. It was fun. I mean, but maybe I should have just gone and tried studying in the Bay Area or California somewhere. I wish I had left earlier back then. And I spent an extra 10 years in South Africa, which I really feel was like, it was good experience. I did some cool things, but I just don't think that. I think I would have gotten more out of being But I don't regret anything. Like I said, you look back and like you make one change, it's a ripple effect to your life. So
that's right.
I wouldn't change a thing, but that's if I could change one thing without having the ripple effect, it'd be probably have more time in California. Yeah, I enjoy it too.
Which makes sense, but I agree with you. The ripple effect is real. Like I'm aware now, like you said, Steve Jobs. Like looking back, you can connect the dots of exactly what the path dependency is in your life, and I'm really happy where I am.
That's great. That's great.
And so if it had gone differently,
happiness is what you're optimizing for in life, ultimately.
Exactly.
You need to optimize for happiness. And so whatever that means for you is what you need to be doing to get there. And if you're happy, then you're successful. And that's important. So what's the one area of personal growth that you're currently focused on improving?
I think it's being more explicit in my communication. One of the things I loved about being at Palantir was that there were a whole bunch of people around you that just instantly got what you were saying. And when I'm working with people who aren't like that, it actually requires
not as smart
explaining things. I don't want to throw any stones, but like,
stone throw.
It takes a lot more explaining to sort of get people to kind of catch up with you and see what's going on, and that requires an investment in communication.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I guess I started this podcast. I got to the point where I felt that there was a huge gap between the knowledge I had and people who might be 10, 15, 20 years younger than me coming into the business world. Yeah. And I was like, and I help them. I'm always willing to help people and educate people, but it's not like an intelligence gap; it's a knowledge gap.
It is, yeah. I mean, so I've been doing some advising as well. It's the same sort of thing.
It's a knowledge gap.
Let me just tell you, like 101.
Yeah, and tell you why and how.
And they're like, oh my god, it's so useful.
And like I meet these super smart people who are just like, they're just so green. Yeah, they just haven't had a knowledge bank of information. So my view was like, okay, start this podcast, get people like yourself on here. Let's have a good conversation, and just give out really good nuggets
Yeah.
of information. People can learn why we say things, there's the experiences, and improve themselves, because it's about improving yourself.
I think that's super useful, because I think there is a lot of you hear advice from a lot of people in this domain, and I think it falls on if you don't actually know how to decode what they're saying.
Yeah.
The advice is often at cross purposes of what's good for people.
Yeah.
It's like, just take the risk or whatever. It's like, just take the risk if you can afford
See, the
to.
thing is, I think, and that's the thing about long form content.
Yeah.
You have the ability to sort of express yourself and contextualize knowledge.
That's right.
And often I post short clips online as well, but like those are kind of nuggets here and there. But when you listen to the long form, like we can dig into any part of your experience and what happened, what didn't happen, and then you start thinking for yourself, because you start realizing, okay, that was the journey, that was the process, that's why they thought what they thought, and this is how they solved the problem. And I think it's more like the critical thinking mindset, systems thinking mindset.
Yes, 100%.
These are important ways to grow. And again, it's a knowledge gap, not an intelligence gap, because kids today are just as smart as we were.
100%.
But because we've been through this evolution, where we were at the dawn of computing.
100%.
We learned a whole bunch of things which are being obfuscated from them. Like when they you pick up an iPad, they have no idea what's going on in the background. It's like, oh, this is very cool. Like most people today, I'd say in their 20s, if they haven't done any computer science or anything, they have no idea what files and folders are. Like on the actual drive, like this fragmentation, etc. Like they have no idea how this. No, I mean,
I at Kairos, when we started like setting up the cloud
and they
computing,
don't need to know.
Well, unless they do,
unless they do.
We started setting up our cloud computing stuff, and like it's really easy to go and like spin up an EC2 instance, and that you get Amazon Linux, and it's like whatever they've decided. And for most things, it's perfectly adequate. You want to just run a web service, it'll work great. We were doing this like numerical computing and geospatial stuff, and like very, very sensitive to the deep, like the libraries that you're using and exactly the computing environment you're in. And customizing that requires knowing how to be a sysadmin from like 20 years earlier. And it was like, oh, I was. So I know how to do this. But most people are not forced into learning that. So like jumping into how you customize that stuff is not a set of skills they had to learn. You're right. Like we were there when you had to learn it.
You had to learn. If you couldn't use a CLI, you couldn't use a computer. It was as simple as that.
That's right.
So it's very interesting how, I mean, technology has gotten easier and more accessible to the masses, but at the same time, we've lost a lot of information and a lot of context. And that applies to even the business world, right? There's so much obfuscation that's happened that people just take things for granted and then just do things. They don't understand why things are done a certain way. And so I just always tell people to just have an inquiring mind, try to understand. This is what Elon's really good at, by the way, first principles thinking on everything. And that's why he's built these great companies. Like you always think in terms of first principles, and I think you solve problems in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah, I think when you break things down and you ask, well, why is it this way?
Yeah, keep asking why.
The first one is, why is it this way? And then the next question is, does it have to be this way?
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, that opens up a whole new set of options for how to do things.
And he wouldn't have gotten rockets into space if he didn't think that way.
Yes.
Or why are we paying so much for it? Why are the rockets reusable? Etc.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot about aerospace at Kairos. We're working with these folks have been like satellite designers and stuff before we started strapping things to planes. And you learn about like, in aerospace, like you only want to fly things that are like space rated or flight rated. And what does that mean? It means that like it's flown before and there's never been a problem. And so it leads to this deep conservatism where it's like, well, this one works. Why would you build a new one? And it's like the answer is there's lots of reasons to build a new one. It's just risky. And you have to decide to absorb that risk in some way.
Okay, so we're going to go into golden nuggets to wrap up.
Good.
These are like rapid fire questions. You get like 20 seconds to give me an answer back, and we keep moving.
I'll try to keep myself to 20 seconds.
What's your top book, podcast, or article?
My top podcast, mostly because I don't actually like listening to podcasts very much, is actually the WTF pod with Mark Maron.
Okay.
He goes in and picks apart artists' minds with these really deep conversations, and I just learned so much that's out of my normal daily flow.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
What's your go-to habit you think everyone should implement into their daily routine?
Exercise, and I'll let you know when I figure out how to do it. But like,
I have a hack for you, by the way.
Yeah.
Personal trainer.
Yeah.
You get a personal trainer 3 or 4 days a week.
Gives you accountability.
It's accountability because if A, you're paying for it if you don't show up, and B, you're letting your trainer down because he's like wasting his time being there. So you go. That's a good hack. What's the best bit of financial advice you've ever received?
You don't, you don't get rich by saving.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You can't save yourself into wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to invest it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good one. What's a common misconception about business or life that you'd like to get the record straight on?
That if you follow the rules, it's all going to work out fine for you.
I love that one.
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. And the rules aren't like, this is the way the first principles thinking comes in, because the rules are like, why is that rule there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Ask the question. Okay. If you go back in time and meet one person in history, who would it be and why?
Wow, that's a good one. I'd have to let me come back to that one. That's one person.
I mean, pick one. There's tons of people. Who do you look up to in history? I mean, it could be dead or alive.
Let's say Churchill. He was a really interesting character, deeply flawed, but like also like.
Would you like to meet him drunk or sober?
Maybe like to get drunk with him.
I would love to. Yes. I'd love to get an 18-year-old bottle of scotch with Churchill under the belt. That'd be great. Okay, thanks. Look, I think we're wrapping up now. Anything you want to say to the audience? Where can they find you on social media? Do you want to be found?
Yeah, I mean, I don't post a lot, but I try to keep it interesting on Twitter. So just Ari Gesher, like my name.
Gesher, yeah.
And there it's just kind of a stream of like things I think are beautiful or really interesting, different thoughts.
And we'll link to your book as well.
Yeah,
Architecture of Privacy. So on the show
if you're looking to build privacy protected systems, it's a great first book to understand how to even think about building them. Not forget about privacy policy, but actually how to build a system that has privacy protections sort of encoded into its architecture.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, Ari, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been great to be here. Thank you so much.
Cheers.